Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. The situation in Afghanistan changed extremely fast. Many of us think that if Afghanistan cannot govern their own country and cannot create their own military, even after 20 years of US assistance, then how long can the US go on supporting them? Their country is their responsibility, so they have to deal with it. In recent times, examples of countries which were decimated by war got occupied by the US and yet went on to become examples of prosperous democracies are Germany and Japan. Let us take a look at what exactly happened in Afghanistan compared to Germany and Japan, which made them crumble instantly when troops were withdrawn. In this episode, I'll talk about the difference in Afghanistan versus Germany and Japan in terms of troops withdrawal, the kind of enemy that was being fought, and most importantly, the way in which democracy and nation building processes were implemented. It would help us understand whether it was fair for us to expect Afghanistan to become stable at this point of time, and if we can blame the Afghan people for not being able to achieve it. Let us first take a look at troops withdrawal, which brought the immediate collapse. The biggest justification that is given is that America has been there in Afghanistan for 20 years. Therefore, it is one of the longest wars, and America cannot stay there endlessly and spend money. Let us compare this with what exactly happened in Germany and Japan. Looking at Germany, at the time World War II ended, on the victory day, there were 1.6 million US troops in Germany. For the first 9 years, there were at least 300,000 US troops at any one point. After 9 years, in 1954, the military occupation of Germany officially ended. However, in 1954, at that same time, a deal was signed with West Germany, which allowed 8 NATO members, including the US, to have a permanent military presence in Germany. In 1989, at the time Berlin Wall fell, that is 45 years after US occupation of Germany, there were 200,000 US troops on German soil. In the year 2020, the number of US troops in Germany was 34,500. In 2020 July, President Trump declared a plan to withdraw 12,000 of these US troops stationed in Germany and announced that the withdrawal process would start soon after. This announcement made Germany gravely concerned about their security. This 34,000 troops was crucial to Germany even after 75 years of US occupation. Even slightly reducing it to 22,000 US troops was a risk for them to maintain peace in their country, 75 years after US occupation. In February 2021, this entire troop withdrawal plan from Germany by Trump was overturned by President Joe Biden, and no US troops were withdrawn from Germany. In April 2021, the US Defense Secretary announced that instead of withdrawing, a token of 500 more US troops would be sent to Germany. This announcement was hugely welcomed by Germany. Looking at Japan, it is now 75 years after World War II and US occupation of Japan. Today, there are more American soldiers based in Japan than in any other foreign country. Around 54,000 US military personnel are stationed there with a mission to keep the peace in the Pacific. This military presence in Japan is not without opposition from the people of Japan, especially from the place Okinawa. But all efforts to counter US military presence in Japan has still failed. The United States spent more than 34 billion US dollars to maintain military presence in Japan and South Korea between 2016 and 2019. Now, comparing this to Afghanistan, in December 2001, after 9/11, there were 2,500 US troops sent to Afghanistan. Over the years, these troop numbers increased and it reached a peak in 2010-11 to 100,000 US troops present in Afghanistan. Since 2012, America slowly started withdrawing its troops from Afghanistan. In 2016, at the time Barack Obama left office, there were only 8,400 US troops in Afghanistan. However, from 2014, the fatalities to the US troops in Afghanistan had drastically reduced, as we can see from this table. From February 2020, there were zero fatalities to US troops for 18 months. In January 2021, at the time Donald Trump left office, there were only 2,500 US troops in Afghanistan, and yet from January to August, there were no fatalities to US troops and minimal aggression by the Talibans. Afghanistan was more or less peaceful and not in a state of war. Though there were plenty of flaws, yet a certain reconstruction of normal life, women empowerment, was being established, which the Afghan people had wholeheartedly embraced. 20 years is not enough time to withdraw troops completely and expect the country to run peacefully. This is proved by the concerns of Germany and Japan even today, who are well established nations and who have had their own militaries established 65 years ago. And yet, they feel that they cannot maintain stability in their country without US troops on their grounds. Let us now take a look at the enemy that was being fought in Afghanistan and how the nature of that enemy makes a whole new difference. The enemy that was being fought in Afghanistan was not a country's army, unlike in Germany and Japan. It was civilians from the population who were indiscriminately armed. This is also called as the militia. This militia was created and armed by the US military in the 1980s, and their aim was to establish a religious state in Afghanistan. They were known as the Mujahideens in the 1980s, and from them rose the Talibans in the 1990s. These fighters were not a regular army, so they do not come under any regular rule of law. They were externally created by powers foreign to Afghanistan, and hence it was not the Afghan citizens' choice. In recent times, America has used the same tactics of war in Libya and Syria, where army was not used, but people from the civil populations were armed to fight the existing regime. These armed fighters were also driven by the same ideology of establishing a religious state. They got a free hand to exercise any inhuman act with the use of US arms. Even after a decade, Libya and Syria are still plunged into a mess which may not be subdued for many more decades to come. In the case of Germany and Japan, the enemy was a regular army, which was also being fought with a regular army of the Allied forces. When fights happen between regular armies, there is a definite end to the war established by an official surrender. If the enemy is a militia, they will never have an official surrender. They are scattered and are free to be anarchists. Empowering these kinds of random elements to fight a country's existing regime can never bring a final end to a war. And later, they can never be defeated as there is no rule of law that binds them. In the case of Talibans, the end of war never happened, where a fresh start could be made, as in the case of Germany and Japan. Finally, the way in which democracy was established in Germany and Japan was very different to what had happened in Afghanistan. In the implementation of any democracy, the electoral system plays a huge role in bringing a governability and a stability to a nation. Taking a look at how electoral system was implemented in Afghanistan. In 2002, Hamid Karzai was chosen as the first interim president after Taliban rule. In 2005, Afghans voted for the first parliamentary elections in 30 years. An overwhelming 9.8 million people turned out to vote. I'll take a few minutes to explain Afghanistan's voting system to show how that system damaged their democracy. The voting process works like this. For their House of Representatives, each voter can cast one vote for their constituency. This system is called as the single non-transferable vote or the SNTV system. In this system, in one constituency, multiple members from the same party can contest and multiple members are chosen for a constituency. For example, this one constituency has 4 seats. From Party X, 4 members are contesting. There are also 3 other independent candidates. The top 4 candidates with the highest votes in that constituency wins the 4 seats. Therefore, it is one person from Party X and 3 other independent candidates that won the seat. Though Party X got 50% of the votes, and all the independent candidates put together got 50% votes, with marginal difference in votes between candidates. In the 2005 elections, candidates were banned from using party symbols on the ballot list. So voters had no idea which party's candidates they were voting. This kind of a voting system creates competition between candidates within the same party. It also creates seats for a large number of fragmented independent candidates. The advantage of having consolidated political parties is that it has more leverage to get things done in the parliament. Also, the MPs are more governed by the doctrines that a party stands for. The electoral system, which created individual fragmented power and party infighting, caused a concentration of power in the hands of the president. As a result, individual strong institutions that could uphold people's rights could not spring up adequately. Various research papers from various institutions outlined how the SNTV electoral system in Afghanistan was weakening Afghanistan's path to democracy. There was a widespread speculation that this system was President Hamid Karzai's strategic calculation aimed at weakening political parties and a credible opposition. The essential strategy for building a new nation is to empower local governments, create independent institutions, and create a credible opposition. In this case, all the powers got concentrated in the hands of the president. In subsequent elections, there were widespread fraudulent votes, violence, and complaints of huge biases by the Election Commission towards the current president. Whoever came to power just stayed in power. At the same time, there was also a widespread perception that foreign actors were backing individuals in election. People in Afghanistan were unhappy by the way leaders were chosen, but they still welcomed the progress brought in by the Western forces and embraced those. However, the process of democracy that was implemented was not suited to create local empowerments. It would have not created strong independent institutions and a robust democratic nation like Germany and Japan. And this was not due to a lack of enthusiasms towards democracy by the Afghan people. In the case of Japan, in 1945, after World War II, bringing democracy in Japan looked nearly impossible. The most important reform carried out by the occupation was creating a new constitution which they presented to the Japanese government to get their opinion. It outlined free democratic elections and for the first time the right of women to vote. Surprisingly, all the clauses were accepted and endorsed by the Japanese government. In the election system, each voter casts 2 votes for their House of Representatives, which is the bigger, powerful House of 465 members. 1 vote is for the candidate, and the other vote is for a party. Thus, it incentivized candidates to belong to parties for a higher chance of being able to get into parliament. The Japanese parliament currently has 9 parties and a thriving opposition. However, for their smaller upper house, the same SNTV system of election used in Afghanistan was initially implemented. Though it was for a very small number of seats for a less powerful house, yet Japan's Liberal Democrat Party, LDP, had a long-term uninterrupted rule and most people believed it was for the SNTV system. This system was later scrapped by Japan in 1994 by pressure from other political parties. However, the biggest contributor to Japanese democracy and huge economic growth was land reforms. This was brought by America and the occupation authorities into Japan. It allowed a large number of people to own land. It stopped the concentration of wealth, power, and land in a few hands. agriculture thrived. Rural areas got prosperous, and it brought about a huge emergence of Japanese consumer domestic economy. In Germany, Field Marshal Montgomery at first banned all political activities for the first 4 months of the occupation. The army took direct control of all civil administrations of towns and districts. The British officials soon realized that administration and democracy could not be imposed by force. They also realized that the British model of democracy, which they initially tried to implement, was not a successful model for Germany. Over time, Harold Ingrams, the British administrator, focused on building democracy from bottom up and decentralizing power. Both sides agreed to certain key principles. One is individuals should be safeguarded against authoritarian government, and two, an electoral system should be designed which can promote an effective opposition. From late 1945, they started to license political parties, initially only at local levels, then at regional levels, and then zonal levels. On 14th August 1949, the first federal elections were held in West Germany to elect members of the first Bundestag or the new federal parliament. For the German parliamentary elections, each voter gets to cast two votes. One is for an individual and the other is for a party. Thus, a strong multi-party structure and opposition has got created in Germany. Most importantly, a huge focus was given to devolving powers to local areas. Only those functions which could not be performed at regional levels, like the central economic planning or managing the transport infrastructure, were retained at the zonal level by the military government administration. As for Germany's economic miracle, a man called Ludwig Erhard was appointed by the US as the finance minister of Bavaria. He was later known as the father of German economic miracle. He made certain drastic changes of introducing a valuable currency, removing price controls, and giving large tax cuts all at once, going against everyone's advice. It created a miracle that most economists didn't think was possible. A lot of myth is propagated that the Afghan people lost their democracy because they didn't want it, and democracy was not suited for their country. The truth is that the Afghan people wholeheartedly embraced the rule of law and democratic principles brought in by the Western world, even with whatever faults it had. If we do not look into the details and compare it in a fair way with where it worked and how it worked, we will judge the situation and the country's citizens completely wrongly. We would also be likely to repeat it in other places or overlook it when such actions build up in other countries or regions. Democracy does not come just by ending war and making sufficient investment and creating free market economies. History shows that success happened when the occupying forces implemented a plan for decentralizing power. Also, it was essential to create an electoral system that made space for a credible opposition. It also takes a long time for a country to stabilize militarily, especially if they are surrounded by enemies. If intense plans are not put in place, the order in a country can break down anytime, and it is out of no fault of its citizens. Please to let me know what you thought about this episode in the comment section below. I'm overwhelmed that the channel has now crossed 2000 subscribers. But please do know that all agreements and disagreements to my content is enriching for me. So please feel free to comment anything that you think about these episodes. Also, please do like and share if you like the content.